Welcome all to the first solo video of the FirePorter collection. In this series, I will take an engine from my model train collection and just dive into how it was made, the backstory, if it has one, etc, etc, etc. This series will kick off with the most popular engine in the railway series, Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas has a rather interesting history when it comes to his basis, which most of us already know by now, so I'm just going to give my brief thoughts on the whole debacle regarding what he's actually based on, or what he can be, can't be, etc, etc, etc. I don't like the E2. I don't like the Ginty. And I really don't like the J50. So, for when I was going to make my model of him originally, I figured for my personal taste, what I'd be most satisfied with, I was going to do something entirely like its own thing. And this is the backstory. In 1895, the Knapford and Ulfstead Railway was founded to serve various communities and industries in the heart of Sodor. The first generation of its engines were a few older copypot 040s. These guys worked the line tirelessly for decades, but the workload began to put a strain on them in the 1900s. And so, in 1910, the KNUR's locomotive works produced 4 060 tank engines that resembled the G5s of the Furness Railway. The main differences being the extended water tanks, among other mostly internal mechanics. The first of the then new R46 class to enter service was none other than Thomas. He was painted in the railway's Viridian livery along with his siblings. 2 of the R46s were assigned for passenger work, while the other 2 handled mostly goods work. And this class of tank engine worked alongside the copypot for many years. In 1923, the railway was absorbed into the Northwestern Railway following the grouping of Britain's railways. The R46s were already painted into the NWR's liveries. Thomas was the only one to be painted blue and became the railway's #1 engine. Thomas was then assigned to run the branch line up to Farquhar, which was its own stopping grounds from his KNUR days, which he still runs to this very day. As for my model for Thomas, it was pretty easy to put together, as the body shell was 3D printed I got from Shapeways by the LBST Thomas on Twitter, which is mounted onto an old Hornby Terrier chassis. I primed the body in a gray acrylic. Technically it isn't primer, but it works, so. Then I painted the body in a blue acrylic by Apple Barrel, the shade being Cobalt Hue. And I brushed on each coat as thin as possible. Yes, I brush paint. Cry about it. And repeated this about 3 times before I was satisfied. Then I painted all his other details and lined the sides. Plot twist, I actually hand painted all of his lining. It was never ever perfect on the first try, so always have to be sure to go back and do touch-up work and make sure it's straight as possible. The whistle I sourced from an old Bachmann Thomas model I had, and the very same would be used for Red Snapper, but that's another story. The buffers are actually 00 scale BR88 buffers, also made by the LBSC Thomas on Twitter. The models is really cool, go support them. And the Smokebox store was actually designed to fit a Tomy model. The file was from Thingiverse. I'll put the credit for the designer on screen now if I find it. Then I scaled it down to fit the front of the model after taking insanely intricate measurements. After I had it printed and cured in resin, I painted it black and made all the details with silver Sharpie. Then I glued the front door to Thomas and boom, the body was done. And the chassis was pretty simple. I just took an old Hornby Terrier chassis that was green, and I just painted all the wheels black and then painted the sidewalls red. And I gotta say, the red sidewalls really bring together the model, in my opinion. And just like that, the model is complete. And I gotta say, it looks absolutely stunning. Not gonna lie. My model of Tom is probably my favorite in my whole collection. I'm really proud of how he turned out. He looks so cool, you know, like unified, if you will. As stated earlier, this video is the first episode of a series, so more of my models will be getting their own solo outings eventually in the near future. So let me know what you all think in the series in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Welcome all to a new episode of the FirePorter collection. For this episode, well, we're doing Porter. Yeah. If you don't like him, you're a bitch. Now, I already know a good chunk of you most likely wondering, why make Porter of all characters, considering he only appeared in his premiere episode, and then occasionally just in the background of some episodes, with very few speaking lines, and then just fell off the face of the earth when the reboot began. To put it simply, I just find the character interesting. In his cool basis, he's an interesting way he was introduced in his premiere episode, season 18, and it's also where my name comes from my YouTube channel. The Porter part in FirePorter partially comes from this random Thomas character that hardly anyone remembers. But enough praising this absolute chat of a side character that's very underrated. Let's dive into my alternate universe take for Porter the Dockside Shunter. "1925 was when Porter emerged from the works and began working life as one of the shunters for the Dockyard Railroad, which is owned and operated by the Big City Railroad in America. Porter worked alongside the likes of Puffa and Little Owl at the Big City port, shoving around trains and unloading ships, you know, the usual dockside shunter lingo. That was until 1942 when Porter was shipped overseas to help out in World War II. By the end of the war, he was sold to British Railways from the War Department and stationed at Naffer Harbor, Soldier's largest port in this AU. Porter remained in his Dockyard Railroad colors during this time with British Railways, the livery being a black base livery with yellow lining. That was until 1968, when the Railways of Sodor gained independence from British Railways, and most of them were repainting their engines out of BR's liveries to further signify their separation. During this time, Porter requested it to be repainted into a quote-unquote bright festive color, in his words, and the Naffer Harbor Board agreed, and had him repainted into a pale yet somewhat bright green livery, which he still wears today. In present day, Porter is still the dockside hunter at Naffer Harbor and works alongside Salty. Porter was a pretty easy model to complete. He is an AHM 060 repainted into a new livery. Like all my other models, the painting process began by brushing on a gray acrylic as the primer. Usually I do a couple coats to make sure the new color shows up just right. Once the primer was dry, I began applying the body color. The exact color I couldn't find in stores or online, so I took a dark green, which I'll put on screen now if I find it, and mixed in some gray with a little bit of white to get the exact shade I was looking for. I used the Trackmaster Porter as a guide when creating this color, as I prefer a more vibrant color rather than the mutedness of Porter's livery in the show. After the main paint job was done, I went back and touched up a few areas in a black acrylic. After touching up the others in black, I went back with some paint pens and lined out a lot of the details. These being the smoke box hinges, boiler bands, handrails, running board, etc. Then after that, I glued in some British style coupling loops so we can use the British rolling stock, and boom! Porter was complete. Porter, in the grand scheme of things, may be a pretty obscure character, but he's one of my favorites. I think he's kind of underrated in my opinion, and I'm so glad to have him in my collection finally. He's kind of the namesake for my channel, if you will. Thank you all for watching this episode of the FirePorter collection, and I'll see you all in the next one. Okay, so we're back. So really quickly, I'm just gonna...
Nice.
Yeah! This is the Porterverse! And this is the Porterverse Workbench. And it's the rebrand of the FirePorter collection and my A Year Lore Rambling series. So, that series is gonna be just Porterverse Ramblings, and this is the Porterverse Workbench. Woo! Now it's out of the way, let's dive into Henry's backstory in the Porterverse. Like in the Railway series, he was built in 1919 from stone experimental designs of a 10-wheeler engine. Except that it wasn't the LNER in this case. It was the Soda and Mainland Railway, who, yes, they survived this long in the Porterverse. He was built on the mainland and then sold to the Tibnith, Wellsworth, and Brenham Light Railway in 1921, where he worked as their express engine, albeit he was kind of shit at doing the job. This was due to his poor design, which plagued him until 1935 when the Flying Kipper crash happened. And like in the Railway series, he was sent for an overhaul. Except, the Endoboard actually has their own balls and they built a new shape for Henry themselves at Crovan's Gate Works. And in 1936, in the early winter, Henry emerged from the works as a stronger engine, Mark II if you will, and he did pretty well from here on as well. But in 1953, he was rebuilt again to have his maintenance standardized as orders from BR. He resembled a standard 5 class, but with a bunch of key differences, like the window shape and a lot of the piping was different. Most of the piping was internal now. And yeah, Henry still works on Soda in present day, and is the NWR's primary goods engine. Okay, now for the model work. So if you recall, to around June 2022, you'll see my first train related video on this channel, which was my big train collection video. You'll see Henry was already there. That is the same model in that video. I just took the body apart like I should have done when repainting him. Then I doused the body into rubbing alcohol, but before that, I removed all the piping and handrails and stuff because they were so frail and brittle, this kept falling apart in my hands. But anyway, so after all that detail was removed, I submerged the body, the cab, and the tender shell into rubbing alcohol. 91% isopropyl to be exact. After that, I took the body out and I dried it up, and once it was fully dry, I went to town with gray primer. It was just primer and several coats of a green mixture. After the main body was painted, I went to town with all detailing, lettering, lining, and matte clearing it. And boom, Henry's done. As for Harvey, he is still very clearly not done. Using my Percy model, I cannibalized him for parts. Don't worry, I'll make a new Percy eventually. And so I sawed off the saddle tank, not the boiler, but yeah. And then I made custom side tanks using some index card I had. But he's still not done, as I still have to finish painting process and fashioning him a crane arm, which I'm struggling to do. Might get the Nakayoshi Harvey for that. So yeah, it's kind of where Harvey is right now. So yeah, he'll definitely get his own video once he's finished. He won't be powered, sadly, as I've found it very difficult to try to fit a motor in with all the extra detailing as well. So I'm probably going to use the motor for powering a coach, like Trackmaster. And now for the man of the hour, the hell-raising snowman. Mr. Snowman was made using a golf ball and a Nerf rival dart that were glued together and then painted white. Then added the arms, which are made out of just mastic tape and hot glue, and then used a scarf from an old jacket string that I had. And then I painted on the buttons and the bow tie, and then matte cleared him, and boom, it was done. I would absolutely love to get some wiring and make him like float around behind the engines like in the episode, but he's a golf ball. That boy's too heavy for that. That boy's thick. So yeah, that was the Porterverse Workbench installation so far. Hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did making this. It was a lot of fun, especially making the snowman. And I'll see you all in the next video. See you guys. Welcome all to the Porterverse Workbench. Woo! We're back again, really quickly, yeah. So, Gordon. Look at him, he's a model in my collection, that's cool. That's him for a bit. And so you're probably wondering why he looks like this, as in the Railway series, officially, Gordon is a Grizzly Stanier hybrid with a lot of Stanier modifications to the prototype of the A1 class for the LNER. Notably being the sloped running board, different shaped buffers, and his own unique valve gear. But I figured it was way too much of a hassle to try to build in model form, and I didn't really like how it melded together in the universe per se. But I do like Gordon being a Grizzly design, as his connection with all the other characters like Flying Scotsman, Spencer, and all those guys. I find that pretty cool. And this is the backstory of Gordon the Great in the Porterverse. Gordon's backstory is, for the most part, basically the same as the Railway series. An old A1 built by the GNR turned LNER in the early 20s and sold to the present-day Northwestern Railway for express duties, and was painted blue upon arrival. But instead of going to crew for modifications, he was gradually modified over the years by the Northwestern. But most of these changes were internal, so he still resembled the shape of an A1. And in 1928, Gordon will receive a corridor tender, brand spanking new, might add, until he very rarely has to refuel on the daily. And Gordon still hauls the express for the Northwestern in present day, and is one of the most popular engines. So for Gordon's model, super easy mod for me, as he was just repainted Hornby tender drive Flying Scotsman model. Yeah, I know, I'm not really much of a fan of tender drive engines, but it works, it works. So, painting process, super easy. Primer, then a bunch of blue coats, detailing, and then clear coating. If you haven't noticed already, this is not how my model looked in the big train collection video from around 6 months ago as of recording. As in that video, Gordon's tender lining was one of the biggest atrocities I committed because I allowed it to stay so crooked. And so, like my Henry model and stuff like that, I redid it. Well, I redid the tender mostly. I actually stripped the paint in rubbing alcohol and then repeat the painting process, but I made sure the lining was straight, neat, and the number was consistent. So now it's similar size to Henry's number 3 on his tender. I also did a lot of touch-ups to the body as it was needed after having a model for about a year. And after a clear cut to the tender, Gordon was officially done. I also gave him a TUGS megaphone, which is really cool ad, but I'll get into how that works in a little bit. But we're still not done yet, my friends. We still have bench updates, so Puffite and Little Owl, I'm redoing them. And why, you ask? Well, this is because I want to give them some new modifications, like custom designed buffer beams. And I'm also going to redo the paint as well. That's why they currently have red roofs. I did a little experimenting with that. And also here's Red Snapper. I didn't do anything to him. I just gave him a clear coat recently, so he looks a lot better now. And here is a GCR04, or ROD280. This isn't custom. I actually got this in July this year when I was in Europe. Bought this guy in York after visiting the National Railway Museum. So he's a cool favorite. I just wanted a reason to show him off. So yeah. And for those wondering, the rule for the megaphones in the Porterverse is that all engines get it except for those that are either semi-streamlined or fully streamlined. Why, you ask? Well, because they're just too fast for them to hold them in place. So characters like Spencer, Connor, and Caitlin wouldn't have visible megaphones for speaking in the front. But characters like Thomas, Oliver, Porter, and etc., they would have visible megaphones. Before you go, I have a quick update. If you recall, I announced special broadcast events going to become a thing next year, and one of them was going to be on the old rails of Sodor. Well, instead of one big video, I figured it'd be better to have it split into 8-episode series, where I focus on each railway chronologically, and go super into depth on what they did, which I'm super excited for. Northwestern predecessors. New series coming out in 2023. Stay tuned for that. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I will see you all in the next one. Welcome all to the Porterverse Workbench once again, and for the first time in the new year of 2023. Woo! For today's episode, we're focusing on a remnant of Dale Thomas events, a dummy unit. Why is the example the way it is? Well, as we're going to the backstory of this dude in the Porterverse. Here we go. Around the 1990s or so, Dale Thomas events began to pop up across the world more and more frequently, and many railways began either converting existing engines to look like Thomas, or just buying/building dummy units, some looking out better than others. This example here shown in my model is one that was built rather cheaply, as it only had 4 wheels and was a lot smaller. Not much is really known about this exact engine other than it was on a United States railroad for some time until around 2003 when it was left abandoned. Meanwhile, the real Thomas began hauling rail tours across the United States starting in 1999, visiting the Strasburg Railroad among other railways. In around 2005, on one of these other tours, Thomas would bump into one of these dummy units and become rather surprised with them, as prior to that point he had no idea they existed. He was still kind of cool with it. as you know, marketability and everything. And he got used to it over time, especially after running into more along the way. Not much is known about the fate of this dude or his whereabouts currently in 2023. So that's kind of where the story ends. The trail goes cold. While the trail goes cold on a backstory, the model story is a whole other level. So this was made from a all-engine scope push-along Thomas that was modified to fit on an 040 chassis I had. The chassis being heavily cut down, of course. So I took the Thomas toy apart, and I stripped the paint by submerging the body in acetone overnight. I would recommend only doing this with metal materials, as acetone can sometimes melt plastic. I've seen it melt Legos before, it's kind of creepy looking. So yeah, after submerging overnight in acetone, I had took out the metal body, and I scraped it with a metal wire brush to get all the paint off. Once that was done, I washed it off with some soap and water just to make sure it was extra clean. And then I primed the boy with some primer. White primer to be exact. Any brand works really. Then after letting that dry overnight, I began doing a hydro dip on this. It's very simple, you just take a bucket of water and spray it on top of the surface. As the whatever pattern floats on the surface, you can slowly dip anything into it and it'll replicate the pattern onto the whatever you're hydro dipping, you know? That's what I did with the body. This was my first time doing a hydro dip on anything, so it looks kind of rough here. But I figured since it is meant to be an abandoned engine, it kind of works. Think of it as graffiti. So yeah, after hydro dipping the body, I let it dry overnight again. And while that was drying, I began doing all chassis work. I had to cut it down and remove the motor. Motor was gigantic, I had to tell you. And then I had to remove all the gears inside and all that stuff to make sure the engine free-rolled smoothly. As there's no motor in this engine, sadly. And then I took a blue paint pen to the wheels to make them blue to match. Well, sort of match, but you know. And then I repainted the toy smoke box black, as the toy I got was originally like a sparkly blue. And then I also repainted the whistles gold, as they were just yellow, and I wanted a more realistic whistle. And then took a black paint pen and painted the top of the running board black to match the Railway series a bit. And then I took a hot glue gun, and then I mounted the chassis, but then afterwards, I took the tip of the hot glue gun using the heat, and I melted down the face's nose. And then made a huge melt mark you can see on the left side of him. So I can make it look like it was abandoned and worn down over time, you know? And then after a coat of matte clear, he was done. Well, I also forgot to mention, I drew on some number 1s with gold paint pen. Just to make sure you know who it is. That was my abandoned Dale with Thomas dummy unit. But we are not done here. We still have some more bench updates. So, if you remember seeing a community post a while back, you'll see that I made SpongeBob's house in HO00 scale. Well, that's not the last of it. I've also made Squidward's house from the same guy who made the print. So I'll put a link in the description so I can find the print. And for those wondering, yes, I do plan to make Patrick's house. Just need to finish him up. He is almost done, I promise. So yeah, that's kind of the whole Porterverse Workbench as it is currently. Thank you all very much for watching. The Creative Craft SMP Aquatic Arc is in the works, so stay tuned for that. And I will see you all in the next video. At last, we return to the Porterverse Workbench. This episode will focus on the one and only Red Snapper, who is a background hunter. Technically, he's an official OC of mine. Well, yes and no, as he's just meant to be a background and just put into the backgrounds of videos to fill up space. He's never meant to have a character in it or anything. But he does have the name Red Snapper, as I felt that given his livery, suited him pretty well. And that he's meant to be more of a dockyard shooter than anything. So yeah, now then, let's jump into how I made this oddity of a model of Red Snapper. Alright, so, it was around May of 2022 when I first came up with the idea to build a Red Snapper. I found myself wanting to build a dockyard shredder out of basically nothing, just from scratch, you know? And I never attempted anything like this up until this point, and I just happened to have a bunch of model parts lying around on my desk. So I began saving through all the parts, and I picked up what would work best. The body is from a Bachmann Thomas shell, and the chassis is sourced from my old 06 cell I found on eBay. So the assembly was bound to be a bitch, so I just put on some Thomas VHSs in the background, and I got to work. The elephant in the room is obviously the chassis, as the body had a lot of overhang over the chassis. So I took an old solder from another model, I bent it and screwed it into place to support the back half of the body shell. I then took measurements and designed and 3D printed a running board. And after gluing everything down, I used some index strips, painted them black, and glued them to the sides of the bent side rod to make it look like the chassis extended to give it design unity, you know? Which makes it look a lot better in my opinion. Since the running board was a little bit off in its measurements, I took a Q-tip, I cut it down, and I used that as the back running board buffer beam. And then used the index card that was folded with masking tape and used as the buffer beam. That was kind of weird, but yeah, it works. So after all the building process was done, I got to painting. I primed the boy with some brush-on gray acrylic. I recommend using actual primer, but this does work if you have this on hand. And so after about a day of drying, I went to town with a Barn Red acrylic by Delta Creative. So what I did afterwards was Apple Barrel's matte black for the smoke box, cab windows, and other details. After that, I went with a silver Sharpie for the cab windows, and I used a tiny screw for the whistle. I know it looks weird, but like I said, background engine, so. And then also used a bell from a busted Bachmann 06 though. Then I went back with the black paint and did the lining using toothpicks and very tiny brushes. And I was constantly going back and forth between the black and red colors to ensure the line was neat. After that whole ordeal, I painted the wheels black. I then designed and 3D printed a smoke box door, as this was a Bachmann Thomas, so it only had a face, and I wasn't planning to use a face for this. So a smoke box door would be needed. After it was printed and everything, I lined out the hinges in silver, glued the thing onto the front, coated the thing in matte clear, and boom! Red snapper is complete. He isn't powered sadly, but he does free roll. Sort of. I do really like this model, as is one of my first scratch builds, but I would like to redo his chassis in the future, hopefully power him as well. I also wanted to give him some buffers eventually, that'd be a really nice addition I'd say. But for now, Red Snapper serves its purpose as a background shelter. But we're not done yet. We still have another model, what I like to call my theme park Gordon. This is in the same league as that dummy Tommy's unit I made a while back. And I like to imagine this Gordon ran on the same line as that dummy unit. However, after the railroad went defunct, it will be sold to a theme park instead of being left abandoned. And the theme park repainted his engine into new colors to get rid of the Thomas licensing as they didn't have the rights to it. Instead, they gave it a new chassis and put it to work on their theme park's railway. And it served, not much done about it, but it was believed that it served pretty well until around 2012 when the theme park shut down. And of course, like the last unit, Thomas would eventually stumble upon his dummy unit abandoned in around 2014. So hence why it's in a dusty shape. So yeah. This kind of story of this dude. It's made from an all-engines go Gordon, which I took apart and changed the chassis and painted everything different colors. Self-explanatory, you know. But before you go, I do want to shed some light on other projects. I have now finished Patrick's Rock, and now Pecan Street is fully complete. Super proud of these. It's all 3D printed with resin, and it's super nice. Really love it. I also have Murdoch and Kenji in the works as well. Kenji should be arriving in the mail by the time this video goes up, and Murdoch is set to arrive within a week or so. And I am very excited for these models. I've been wanting to make this guys for a long time. Super excited for the future of this series. Oh yeah, I also have a TikTok page, so go follow me there. I post videos occasionally there. Pretty fun. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I'll see you all in the next one. Welcome everyone back to the Porterverse Workbench. For this episode, we're going to be back to basics to focus on an official character from the Thomas universe, which was the strongest engine to ever live on Sodor, Murdoch the Mighty Engine. So we'll start this episode by going to the backstory of the ever iconic 9F locomotive. Here we go. Murdoch was built alongside all of the other 9Fs in the 1950s, and did mostly goods work, and he was painted in black like the majority of his class. And he was one of the last 9Fs to be in service by the time steam tracks were retired. In 1968, the NWR officially separated from British Railways, and was once again its own entity. And in the deal that was made, a handful of engines and rolling stock were transferred over into Northwestern ownership. We'll go into this in another video, but among these engines in this deal were 3 Class 08 shunters, which were Paxton, Splatter, and Dodge, a Class 28 named Boko, and of course the 9F Murdoch. And Murdoch, along with the other engines, arrived in late 1968, and he requested a repaint. as he grew sick and tired of wearing boring old black, and he wanted to change. Like I said in the Low Rambling series, Murdoch was always a fan of Halloween and loved jack-o'-lanterns in particular, and he requested that he be repainted into an orange tone for his new livery. And the NWR agreed, and Murdoch was repainted into a palish orange livery with red lining. And after his repainting, he was placed onto the main line, and became one of the premier goods engines for a railway, which he still is to this very day. Now that we got the backstory down, all that remains is the model itself. Murdoch was made using a Hornby 9F that was repainted into its iconic colors. This is a tender model, but it does work all the same to me. It does run, which I'm happy. Not much of a super technical guy when it comes to models. I'm just like, if it runs, cool. The painting process was very simple, like all the other models for the most part. Coat of primer, a few coats of orange paints, this being a custom mix this time. Then came the lining, the detailing, and then the clear coating. And like the majority of my other models, Murdoch has a TUGS styled megaphone on its front cab window. There was a 3D print that was scaled down to fit the window. And after all that was applied to the model, he was pretty much complete. Except sorta not really, as he lacks any lining and lettering. I know usually I do lettering and numbering, but I felt that the model just looked a lot better without it. He did lack any numbering and lettering in the TV series, so this kinda works for me, I guess. Who knows, I might add at least a number to his tender, you never know. But for now, Murdoch is finished, and he is easily in the top 5 favorites of the entire collection. He just looks so cool. I mean, look at him. Look at him. It's gorgeous model. Oh yeah. That is Murdoch, the iconic 9F. Definitely adds a bit of color variety to the collection, wouldn't you say? I am very proud of this model. He's easily one of my favorites in the collection, as I've already said. This looks so nice, you know? Look at him, he's just all unified and well assembled, you know? Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench, and I will see you all in the next one. Woo! We are back in the Porterverse Workbench. Oh yeah! This episode will focus on my favorite models in the collection, Kenji. This character has quite the unique backstory in the Porterverse. But before we dive into how the model was made, we'll just dive into Kenji's backstory in the Porterverse. Here we go. Kenji was built in Japan in 1966 for a rather unique purpose. Before he ever worked in Japan, he actually went to Sodor. But why to Sodor, you ask? Well, you see, in 1966, a World's Fair was being held at Ulfstedt Castle, and Kenji was sent to show off what was then Japan's pinnacle of high-speed rail travel, and was painted into a special silver livery for this occasion. The Ulfstedt World's Fair lasted from March 1966 to June of that same year. After this, Kenji went back to Japan for regular service. Kenji would work in Japan until around 2008, when he was retired from service, after many years of working. And meanwhile, the Earl of Sodor, Sir Robert Norbury II, heard about Kenji's history on Sodor and feared the worst when he was finding out he was withdrawn. And so, Sir Robert quickly flew over to Japan and purchased Kenji from the JNR. And another thing that by the time Kenji was withdrawn, he was wearing this unique lime and gunmetal livery. Looks pretty cool. And Kenji was restored into his World's Fair condition by the Ulfstedt Castle Relay by 2009. And Hiro, who is also from Japan, was understandably delighted to see another Japanese engine join the UCR, and the two became close friends almost immediately. And Kenji remains at the Ulfstedt Castle Relay, where he is either a static display or an engine hauling the excursions for the day, and he does this with pride to this very day. Now that we got the backstory of Kenji out of the way, let's dive into how I made this guy. A very lucky eBay find was ultimately how I managed to make this guy. I took the body apart completely, and I cleaned all the plastic bits and non-electric bits with soapy water. And once that was fully cleaned, I went to priming, and I primed everything in this flat white primer. Remember, always leave any primer or spray paint to dry for at least a full day before doing anything else, as if you try to do anything like masking or lining, and you peel out the tape, it'll end up ripping, and if you do any of the mess ups like that, the paint will peel as well, and you have to start all over again. Anyway, so, After the primer dried, I went in with a chrome spray paint. I initially sprayed every part of the body in this color, as I wanted to be more accurate to the show, but I later changed that, so I'll get that in a little bit. But while that chrome spray paint was drying, I went in with a blue color for the running board. It's the same blue I actually used with Thomas and Gordon, in fact. And after another day of drying, I put them all together to see how it looked. It was show accurate, but I felt like something was off, you know, like some of the colors didn't like pop. It wasn't like super like standoutish, you know. I began pondering this after a couple days, and I was thinking, wait a minute, what if I just paint the roof in a gunmetal color and the front snout thing white? That would make it stand out, right? And so I did that. I went to the local hardware store and I picked out some gunmetal spray paint, and then tried it out on the roof. Now this was what's holding the metal back for me. It looks so much better now. Like, it looks amazing now. And I then used a white paint pen for painting the front bit. Super easy. After I was sorted out, I gave the model a coat of matte clear. And just like that, Kenjo was complete. He is easily one of my favorites in the whole collection, as he is the first Japanese model in my collection. Maybe one day I'll make a Heroes if I can find a D51 for a cheap price. Who knows? And also Mugen Train as well. I definitely want to make Mugen Train feature. He's really cool. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Workbench. And I'll see you all in the next one.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.